This is the S1 Mark II, and I've been using this thing non-stop for the last few months, and I'm really loving it. It's not perfect, but I've had almost zero issues with this thing over that time period. But one thing that always haunted me was the thermals. You guys know what I'm talking about. But Lumix just sent me this brand new firmware that aims to fix a lot of those problems, as well as add some very much welcome new features. So today we're getting into all of that. The S1ii, S1rii, S1ii all got a bunch of updates, as well as their Lumix Flow app has some very welcome additions added to it. So let's go. But first, I do want to start with the thermals because it's been the most hot topic with this camera so far. No, that pun wasn't really intended, but it happened anyway. So let me go over my experience with the S1ii and overheating. So in the real world, I never got an overheat to happen. I never even got a warning, although I did force it to overheat in direct sunlight in this video up here. Sure, I have a tiny little fan I use as a precaution in the hottest situations, but I probably used it less than half a dozen, maybe a dozen total times this entire Chicago summer. But yeah, the camera eventually can and will overheat depending on how you use it, especially with direct sunlight. Until now. No, I'm just kidding. You probably still can overheat this thing, but from the short tests I've run, it seems to be much better. So, of course, this update comes right after summer and even fall is kind of getting over with, so I opted for an indoor test. I ran it at about 70 degrees Fahrenheit or around 21, 22 Celsius, I believe. That'll have to do. Don't worry, I pushed this thing pretty hard, shot in 6K60, CF Express, internal battery, and USB-C. So, and the reason that matters is because every additional accessory you add is going to add more heat. So with all that said, we're going to run this test pre and post firmware. As you can see, they're both going strong for quite a while, but the pre-firmware S1ii does get a warning about at the hour mark, and at the hour and 20 minutes or so, shuts down. Of course, I did have to restart the post-firmware one because I was stupid and I kept having to delete footage, but it was essentially going non-stop besides deleting footage every once in a while. Going back to the pre-firmware though, I was able to continue shooting less than 5 minutes later with the pre-firmware S1ii and got another 20 minutes before shutting down again. And then 5 minutes later, it was ready to go. So not terrible, but again, if this was any hotter or much hotter, it'd be a very different story. And yeah, you might notice that the S1ii post-firmware has been going with not so much as a warning this entire time. And after a whopping 4 hours and 5 minutes of constant recording, 6K60 power delivery, I just forgot to erase the files, but it probably would have kept going much longer. So at this point, I was pretty much convinced that this camera was going to do much better against overheating in many situations. I mean, sure, I couldn't test it in direct sun or super hot environments without shooting up my utilities bill at the very least, but it was a very promising start at the very least, and I would encourage you to check out some other people's videos who might live in warmer climates and had time to test this out or will have time in the future. I think they're releasing a short list for the S1ii, S1, S1rii as well, showing the improvements that they've made and some tests that they've run, and are saying stuff like 4K60 is considered an unlimited mode, for example, on the S1ii, whereas some they will kind of point out that there's some limitations. So that's going to be awesome for people shooting longer events like us, wedding and event guys and gals and everybody. I know I'm kind of spending a lot of time on this, but it is one of the more important things about this camera. So why did this overheating happen in the first place? Well, they couldn't really tell us too much, but it was, I think, just how the camera was handling ambient temperatures, as well as the other elements that just make these cameras hotter, like CF Express running hotter than SD, and how much processing these cameras are doing. And one thing I will say is they specifically said there was a potential issue that the camera would overheat a lot faster and be a lot more cautious when moving from a cool to a hot environment. So some people testing this out on YouTube, as well as like wedding people like me going from inside a church to like an exit, would start to have issues specifically in that situation. So again, I'm sure other people will have different results, and I'm very curious to see these other tests, but at my temperature controlled 70-degree test, it was very much improved. And even if it can't be fixed entirely, I'm glad they were able to make such big improvements. But let's move on to the other fantastic little things that this update brought, because Panasonic can't just do one thing in an update. There's a few other things I think that are pretty welcome. Like, so there's a slower burst and pre-burst, blah, blah, blah. There's a slightly slower burst and pre-burst mode, which could be handy for photographers. But for me doing video, honestly, things like the MP4 Lite finally being added and some improvements with autofocus and how that works is great. Even better for me, honestly. MP4 Lite, of course, is still stuck at 30 FPS, but it's good to have for the quick turnaround social media stuff, sending it to your phone. And the autofocus improvements are pretty nice. I haven't had a chance to test them too in depth. They say it's been improved, which they always say, of course. I'm sure they're being honest, but how much improved, only time will tell. But it's more the way that the autofocus is displayed now that I think is going to be very, very nice. So the new improvements allow you to do two things. Number one, when there are multiple people in your frame and you're on that like wide mode, you can now choose to display only the subject which is being focused on instead of showing like all the subjects in a line. And two, the big one for me is you can now finally set the face and eye to be a single rectangle over the eye, rather than using the old crosshairs in a box like it used to be. I think the new one is a little cleaner, but I didn't ever really hate the old one, but I think I will be using the new one a lot. One thing that I see as being huge for wedding event and just run and gun filmmakers in general has to do with the ISO improvements. So first off, there's now a fun little color bar that changes when going from your low to high base. It's a good reminder to avoid the areas just below the red line, just before your high base ISO. And it'll probably help you remember what those ISOs are. Like, of course, I have Vlog memorized, 640 and 5000, but when I switch to, you know, a standard profile or Cine D or RE A2 profiles, I really have no idea what the base ISOs are for those modes, so this is a great little visual reminder. But the big one for me is an auto ISO function that can be accessed a lot easier now. So let me explain. Before, if you wanted to switch from manual to auto ISO, you'd scroll all the way back past the low base, and that would obviously ruin your shot because it would be stepping through, getting darker and darker and darker, and then it would just snap into automatic ISO. Now you can hit a custom function button or change the function of one of the dials when hitting your ISO button to instantly and smoothly transition into auto ISO. The only downside is once you hit that button or switch back into manual, it doesn't go to your current ISO. It instead returns to what it was set at before, but hey, I'll take it. Whatever I get, I'll take it. I think this is going to be great for shooters of all times because, like, I'm imagining like you're at 640 ISO, filming like a speech at a wedding, and then people start clapping or you want a reaction, and you whip over to the crowd. You can hit that auto ISO button, capture whoever in the crowd you want to get, whip back, hit it again, and you're back to the exposure on the dance floor or stage or whatever it is. There's some other nice additions as well, like the long anticipated addition of the 1.6x anamorphic to stabilization and D-squeeze, which honestly it's not a huge deal for me because you could kind of get away with 1.5, but it's still an auto mission, and I'm glad that it's finally in there. It's a long time coming for sure, and just proves once again that Lumix is by far the best brand for anamorphic shooting, and it's not even close, guys. Oh, and don't forget Lumix Flow. So this is like a monitoring app essentially. There's a lot more, but the main thing I've been using it for is monitoring. You can use an USB-C cable to turn your phone into a monitor for your camera, and with the latest updates, it's now much more usable, allowing you to view more accurately what's on your camera screen. Essentially, the big three updates for me is one, you can now put your monitoring LUT on Vlog so you can actually see some colors. Two, you can see your frame markers, and three, you can see more accurately what your focus is doing where it was just like a free-for-all before. These are some nice updates, and using your phone as a quick monitor is really nice. It has a lot of other awesome features like marking your clips for quick editing, like I said, monitoring your camera before, or even using it as like a mini video village where you can shoot this out to like 4 different devices for when you're on set. I definitely need to make a video on Lumix Flow in the future, and just like I did with Lumix Lab. If you want to see that video on how to use Lumix Lab in a pro workflow, check this video out. And that's about it. I mean, there's a lot of other little things in this firmware for Lumix Flow and the S1ii, but also the S1R2 and S1ii 2E, whatever. And I'm not really covering that because I'd just be reading the list. But this is my experience with this firmware. Hope it was interesting. Hope you learned something. I'm really glad they made these updates. Like, comment, subscribe. And if you did subscribe, you know I'm going to see you, right? At this point, you know. Okay.